It extends plus warranties to 7 years or 100,000 miles, while the warranty on the transmission control computer goes to 10 years or 150,000 miles. Rich Thomason reports.
An explosion at a chemical tank cleaning business in northwestern Indiana injured 3 workers. It happened this morning in an industrial area of East Chicago. The 3 injured are listed in stable condition. Breaking news and analysis at townhall.com. Germany's economy shrank during the April to June period of this year.
Germany's economic strength. There is a great deal of its manufacturing industry and its success in selling its goods abroad. But that does leave the country particularly exposed to unfavourable international developments, most recently the tensions that have followed President Trump's more assertive approach to trade. China is the main target for the US, and it's also an important market for German goods. The National Statistical Office said that both imports and exports had declined in the new figures. That was in contrast to what happened within Germany itself. Consumer spending and investment both rose.
BBC correspondent Andrew Walker. 3 firefighters backed by water-dropping planes and helicopters are battling a wildfire burning through a protected nature reserve on the island of Epstein for a second day. Hundreds of people have been evacuated from 4 villages and a monastery. More of these stories at townhall.com. I'm John Scott.
The following is an America Matters media production. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of the station or its advertisers, although we think they should. But that's the opinion of America Matters.
This is not America. Sha-la-la-la-la. Little piece of you.
Hello, welcome back to Talking Truth to Power, Nevada's Freedom Talk Radio. I am your host, Brendan Trainor, an award-winning writer in here in Northern Nevada, and my co-host, Leland Faegre. And Leland, how's the weather up in Tahoe today?
Warm. I think we're 86.
Okay.
Maybe closer to 90 than... I mean, we're in that pocket where we usually get very, very warm temperatures. So it's expected, and it'll last a couple weeks.
All right.
And then we... as nature revealed the end of last week, it's transitioning.
Yes.
Because we didn't get out of the 60s last Thursday and Friday, I think.
Right. We didn't get much more than the low 90s.
Yep.
And that's good. I mean, we haven't hit 100. So global warming is not here in Nevada.
No.
And it's not anywhere, really. But
that was what I was going to finish with. Yeah, it isn't anywhere.
So we have a little announcement to make. So we're live now on our website, Talking Truth to Power Facebook group, right?
We are?
Isn't that right?
Yes, we are.
Don't scare me, because we had technical difficulties earlier and last week.
Our technician team worked it out for us as we went into the show. So yes, we should be live right now. So.
Great. So go to Facebook, Talking Truth to Power.
And part of our technician team is our future Hall of Fame inductee.
And
Craig Moss.
Drum roll.
Yeah, we don't little sound effect in there.
All right. Well, that's right. We are a high-class institution here at KCRQ.
KCKQ.
KCKQ.
And we spare no expense.
Yes. So we have a lot to talk about, as usual, even though this is August, the dull part of the political year when Congress is in recess, and Mitch McConnell, Massacre Mitch is now being called, is trying to keep it that way.
Moscow Mitch.
Moscow. At first he was Moscow, now he's Massacre.
Can we hyphenate? Moscow Massacre.
Yeah. And so the number one topic on most people's lips is the suicide suddenly during the night, Saturday night, of Richard Epstein in his holding cell, I guess you would call it.
Jeffrey
Epstein. I'm sorry. Jeffrey Epstein. And it's quite interesting, huh? I mean, look at all the things that had to go wrong for him to be able to do that. First of all, he was taken off suicide watch, even though he either tried to commit suicide or was attacked a couple of weeks earlier. Second of all,
Now,
they...
that was at the suggestion of his legal team,
Right.
as I understood it.
Yes, but without a psychiatric input as far as we know.
Right.
Yes.
Well, what I was leaning towards mentioning is that the legal team, it's not their providence to suggest
Yes.
that kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So the suggestion is suspicious in and of itself because they know better.
Yes.
And if it's his legal team, is he connected to a much larger team? You know, like maybe the mega group, for example?
Yeah, we're going to discuss the mega group, this mysterious group that's lurking behind the screens, behind the curtain there.
You're not going to say they're in the shadows, are you?
No.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And then for some reason, he didn't have a cellmate that night.
He did, but only for part of the night.
Oh,
And then he was moved
okay.
3 hours apparently before he. Do we have a body? Do we even have a body?
You know, we don't know, do we?
I mean, they pushed someone in an image. I saw an image, a body going into a room there. Mm-hmm. But there was no proof that was.
Well, we
actually
have
him.
to trust the government. Of course, we have a body.
Ah, okay.
All right. And then there was no video camera inside his cell. I don't know whether it was turned off. Maybe you do, or whether it just wasn't there.
Well, I understand that they don't have cameras in the cells as
at
such,
that facility.
but they have them in the space as in the egress as you approach the cell.
And
So there are cameras there. Yeah.
okay. And so then the bedding was strong enough that he could hang himself with. If he was on suicide watch, I understand he'd have tissue.
I understood that the sheets are not strong enough,
Oh.
and that's their purpose: is that they can't be used
During a suicide watch.
to promote
Yeah.
a suicide. That they are effectively like paper,
Right.
and also probably easily biodegradable.
Yeah, so he proved that, Mr. Epstein proved that you do not have to jump off a chair to hang yourself. You can just lean forward with a noose around your neck, or I've heard of people doing it, attaching it to a doorknob.
I've always been curious how you could actually pull that off, but it happens enough, often enough that it's possible.
Okay.
Whether the desire is there, it's possible.
No one watched him for hours, and they didn't check on him. And, of course, the prison says, well, we just need more money, more staffing. Give us more money. We won't do it again. Although today there's allegations that there may have been false paperwork submitted as well. So, of course, Attorney Barr is furious. Attorney General Barr is absolutely furious.
He's justified in being furious, but the question is, how long has this been going on? And, El Chapo was in the same facility. They managed to keep him up.
Yeah.
So.
And so, I mean, this is not an ordinary criminal. This is with the ability to implicate who knows how many people are currently in power or close to power with his testimony. So.
Well, what are you alluding to here, Brendan?
Do you think he was Hillaried?
I think there's a great chance that there's coordination in this event. Yeah. I'd like to allude to the Enron scandal years ago. Remember when Kenneth Lay, just in advance of his sentencing, suddenly dies? Now, did he die? Was there a body?
Oh, yeah.
Or did he go out on his yacht in the Caribbean, never to be seen from again, heard from again? I mean, I don't know these things. We're just...
Yeah, well, I mean, we have the same thing with Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell's father. I mean, did he kill himself because he demanded something of the Mossad, his longtime partners?
By the Mafia links to the mega group?
Yes.
Is that what you're suggesting here?
Well,
don't go away.
The Delta and Bonanza saloons in Virginia City are simply elegant. Imagine ascending the grand staircase and being surrounded by the Victorian elegance and grandeur.
This is America Matters Media on AM 1180 KCKQ, a Lotus broadcast station. The power of radio since 1967.
Are you shy and don't want to talk on the air? Text us your questions or comments to 775-237-2266. Now back to the show.
Hello, welcome back to Talking Truth to Power, Nevada's Freedom Talk Radio. I am your host, Brendan Trainor. My co-host is Leland Faegre, and we were talking about the Epstein affair, and I would like to encourage anyone who's interested in the deep state and what's going on to visit a website called the Mint Press, and they've been running a 4-part series on the deep state and surveillance that actually goes back to the McCarthy era and the post-World War II era through the Reagan years and now into the current time. One of the interesting figures that they talked about this week is focusing more on Republican connections to the deep state. Next week will be a lot about the Democrats and the Clintons, which I know a lot of you will be interested in seeing there. But an interesting figure here that we come across this week is Ronald Lauder, the founder of Estee Lauder perfumes, right, and a well-known philanthropist, as well as a former U.S. ambassador to Austria.
Of all places.
Yes, which we know that they found an expired Austrian passport in Epstein's home. And he did not qualify for that.
So no, you're not suggesting that Lauder provided that passport to Epstein?
Yes, of course. So I would never do such a thing. But yes,
you should be ashamed of yourself.
And their ties to Israel, and especially the current President Benjamin Netanyahu, but many other, including his opponent. We know that Ehud Barak has been implicated.
Somewhere between 10 and 100 times.
Yes.
He's visited the premises of Epstein's net worth, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. And there are photos. There's a photo out there on the web that shows that on the same day of one of his visits, he was wearing a covering on his face that covered everything except his eyes. And on the same day, there were several young models that also showed up there.
He said he never saw?
No, he never saw them. No, of course not.
Yeah.
No.
Maybe that was the connotation of the question. He didn't see women there. He just saw girls there.
Yeah, it could be. And, this whole thing is interesting, too, because, a lot of these women that hung out with Epstein, they were hired by Victoria's Secrets through Wexner, the founder of Victoria's Secrets. Mm-hmm. And they could make good money doing that. And
they did make good money doing that.
Let's face it. I mean, women are not angels. We all know that. And
that's where you're wrong, Brendan.
Yeah. And they oftentimes will use what they have in order to get ahead. And they could make some of the women, not all of them, but some of them wound up not as runway models, I'm told, but as promotional models that could make $5,000 or $10,000 a week. In that area during a Victoria's Secret promotion. Mm-hmm. So they weren't exploited that much, especially if they were, not 12 or 13. Another thing, a pedophile is really someone that likes prepubescent girls, and I don't see him really be any proof of that. He liked very young post-pubescent girls, like 12, 13 years old is accused, or some of them 15 and so on. And, that it should be really called a pederast, but in modern times, a pederast seems to have migrated so it's only gay men that go after post-pubescent boys. So it's interesting English grammatical there. So we seem to have lost the distinction there in our language. But at any rate, regardless of all that...
well, that wouldn't be the first time.
No. And so we have this incredible link between the Mafia and the intelligence agencies and legitimate businessmen that stretch back for generations. And is America finally going to get sick and tired of our ruling elites? Are we really going to see something different come out of this?
I think there's been some awareness, some education, some academic options that are available that didn't used to be, particularly on the internet. Mm-hmm. So there could be a maturity at some point. I don't see it's culminating, at least in any significant way, just yet. Mm-hmm. But wouldn't that be something if we were to suddenly get our act together as citizens and push back?
Mm-hmm. And that's something that we have as far as the gun violence. I'm thinking also along these lines that a lot of people are talking about the mentally ill, and that is the fact that but very few people that are mentally ill are violent. I mean, you can have a schizophrenic who thinks that he just dissected Queen Elizabeth and put her organs in his refrigerator, and then when you go to look at the refrigerator, it's got nothing but hot dogs and stale buns, So these people live in a fantasy world, but as long as they're on, even if they're not on their meds, they're rarely ever dangerous to anybody.
They live in a fantasy in that they wouldn't be able to evaluate accurately the mental deprivation of some of these people.
But is American society itself mentally ill? I mean, look at the... I mean, to create these kind of mass murders, even though the rate of violence has been declining since 1993, but we're getting this phenomenon of people taking out, tens of people at a time, and suicide by cop. In the most cases, in El Paso, he allowed himself to be arrested, but that's unusual. But is it like end of empire syndrome? Are we going through a complete depression because our elites, as I just said, as we see with the Epstein case, our elites have been exposed as absolute liars for so often?
Well, I'm not sure if that's the determinant, but I can tell you what I think, and I've been making this claim for many years, that we're on the threshold of a new dark age.
Okay.
Similar to others that we've experienced all through human history. And until we get our act together, it doesn't look good.
Where are the Irish monks when we need them?
Well, they're making wine.
And so this is an interesting thing. And also we have Marianne Williamson, right? Is that yes? Forgive me, but I haven't read her book, and I've only seen her a few times.
Well, I'd get on that if I were
but
you.
she's calling for a spiritual awakening, and the church attendance in the mainstream churches has been declining rapidly in both the Catholic and the mainstream Protestant denominations. And are the American people, is this a symptom of not being as nearly as religious as we claim we are? Also, that we are experiencing this existential angst that we have to go and do things like that Dayton shooter who was in the extremely violent metal punk rock scene. Is that substituting? Is like some kind of satanic impulse substituting for what we used to call religion in this country?
I think you're onto something in its various forms. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's, and you don't have to be a traditional religious person. You don't have to go to church to have a spiritual revival. But America has had spiritual revivals several times in its history, but we haven't had one since the 70s where, real good old-time religion. Like the first one was 1817, and even some of the deists from the American Revolution reconverted to Christianity.
See, and I did not know that.
Yeah.
Were they seeking public office?
No, they were too
Are you
old.
sure?
Yeah, I am. Gordon Woods, the scholar of the American Revolutionary period, talks about it. But of course, it's been a theme in libertarian thought with Murray Rothbard that how a society sees the end times is quite important. And there were several religious revivals in the 19th century and in the 20th, but the last one was in the 70s. We haven't had one for many decades now.
See, I would interject at the thought that a deist would ever switch his paradigm of the universe back to revealed religion. I think he probably was never a deist in the first place.
Right. I mean, that's possible. I mean, the founders were rather moderate deists, except for Thomas Paine and I hear Ethan Allen and Jefferson, but most of them were rather moderate in comparison, but they were still deists.
Well, it was the religion of its time.
Right.
It was somewhat faddish, I suppose, or could be considered retrospectively as being more contemporarily faddish than anything else. But You wouldn't know that by reading Paine's book.
No. well, Paine was kind of unique in his anti-clericism. He
was outspoken with it.
Yes.
I don't know how unique he was. I mean, I got the impression that there was just a handful of Christians in that group of 50, but
You mean the founders?
Yeah.
I think there were more than a handful.
Not by what I've read about it, but
really?
Regardless, it seemed to be pretty much the preferred orientation out of the Age of Enlightenment that revealed religion had revealed itself to be without value.
Yes, but the American founders were very much for freedom of religion.
Absolutely.
They valued religion.
Mm-hmm.
Benjamin Franklin, even
also
though
a deist.
he never attended services or rarely attended services, they all read the Bible, but mostly not as revealed word, but as ethical treatises.
They would invoke aspects or passages on occasion. Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So. And again, we don't necessarily need that good old-time religion to come back, but we need maybe something in the line of what Williamson is, the tradition that she's in, the Emerson and Thoreau and even Norman Vincent Peale, which Trump is a big follower of. He's a big follower of Peale.
I wish we didn't have to take a break, ladies and gentlemen. It's just getting good. Stay with us.
Carson City Motorsports presents professional short-track motorcycle races at Carson City's Fuji Park Rodeo Grounds.
This is America Matters Media on AM 1180 KCKQ, a Lotus broadcast station. The power of radio since 1967.
Want to expand your advertising dollar? Sponsor this or any America Matters program by calling 775-827-8900, extension 2. Now back to the show.
Hi, welcome back to Talking Truth to Power, Nevada's Freedom Talk Radio. I am your host, Brendan Trainor, my co-host, Leland Faegre, and we are talking about, we have been talking quite a bit about the Epstein scandal and the need for some kind of a spiritual revival in America. But let's go overseas for a minute and let's talk about what's going on in Hong Kong.
Why would we want to talk about Hong Kong?
Well, because a lot of people are talking about it, and we're seeing a lot of video from it.
Is that because there's 1 million people in the streets?
Yeah. Well, there's not that many.
No, not today, but there has been that many estimated in the streets.
Yeah, but the thing is that Hong Kong is. It appears to me that I'm going to take a contrary position to what you're hearing, and that this is another color revolution. And in fact, the color black has been mentioned a couple of times. Like we had the rose and the orange and all kind of different colors, and none of them have come out very well in different countries. And so what we have, Hong Kong...
the presence of all color is black.
Yes, yeah. So is this the big one, the ultimate one?
It's one of them.
Yeah. So Hong Kong, it's no longer the pearl of the Orient. Its luster is faded a bit. Did
that happen in '97 when when Great Britain let it go?
Well, it happened largely because of the Chinese turn towards capitalism, or their version of capitalism, Chinese style. And Hong Kong is no longer the only free enterprise area in China. You have Sichuan, which is much larger than Hong Kong, just 100 miles or so up the river there from Hong Kong, and it's no longer what it used to be. It's no longer the gateway to China as much as it used to be. Hong Kong thrived without any manufacturing, any agriculture, more or less strictly on free trade and finance. There was, and the Hong Kong people, contrary to what you're seeing, are not very eager or fans of democracy. They never have been. In fact, the reason why Hong Kong was as prosperous as it was, if any of you remember Milton Friedman's video series, Free to Choose, he led off talking about Hong Kong and how, it defies the common wisdom because it's without any minimum wage laws, without any regulations on business, almost a completely laissez-faire society, and with very little democracy. The British kind of bequeathed it, and this strict classical liberal structure that they had maybe in the 19th century, in parts of the 19th century, but they had long ago abandoned, and Hong Kong had it. Some of the minor officials, and like I guess you would call a city council type of thing, they were elected, but then they turned around and elected themselves the top officials. So it was an indirect democracy as far as it was a democracy, and it was despite the lack of a social safety net and regulations and everything else, the per capita income in Hong Kong was higher than in its mother country, Great Britain, for a while. And so to the idea that the people of Hong Kong are starving for democracy seems a little bit odd to me, and a little bit strange. I don't think so.
They have no tradition.
Right.
Yeah.
And the contrary to what you may be seeing, that it appears that this is a left-wing movement, and what they are applying is what I came across in the 60s when I was active in the mass demonstrations that we had, in that it was always the Marxists that wanted to confront the police. It was always the Marxists that wanted to incite violence in order to reveal the violence inherent in the system.
Well, that's still the case.
Yeah. And so that's what they're doing. And some of the leaders apparently have been caught talking about the theory of maximum violence is not so much to commit acts of violence against people, although we do see that the crowd is attacking the police often, but to the destruction of property.
Mm-hmm.
And Occupy New York, to my remembrance, they never really occupied the buildings in Wall Street. They were mostly out in the streets.
Just out on the sidewalk.
Yeah, on the sidewalk, yeah. Mm-hmm. So to occupy the airport there for 2 days and halt the airport traffic, that is a direct attack upon what Hong Kong is famous for, which is commerce. Mm-hmm. So I'm just cautioning you. And then when they talk about Tiananmen Square, as we discussed several months ago on the show, that iconic photo of the lone Chinaman facing up to the tanks.
Yeah, that happened in the days following the actual skirmish.
He was just some guy that ran out to the square and wanted to jump on a tank to get his picture taken or whatever, to have a selfie.
Well, he might have been genuine in his experience, but it wasn't a timely event.
No, it didn't happen during the actual confrontation.
Right.
And there's a lot of things we don't know about Tiananmen Square even, and who was really responsible for most of the violence that went on there.
You're not going to suggest the Central Intelligence Agency had a role in that?
Well, the CIA is probably something to do with it, but I'm talking about...
Where aren't they involved?
I'm talking about Soros.
Yeah.
And the NGOs.
Well, he's the left CIA.
Yeah. Like the Foundation for Defense of Democracy has been over there.
Yeah,
and
but there is suggestion that the CIA is involved in these demonstrations.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be the source of the American flags.
Yes, it could be.
And the Star Spangled Banner that they're singing in the streets.
Right.
Apparently joining in with us.
All we need is Victoria Nuland handing out cookies. But so I just caution you to take what you're seeing and remember that they are using what they call the maximum violence theory of demonstrations in order to provoke a violent response from the police and get photo ops. For example, the New York Times ran with a photo of a policeman pointing a shotgun, and the shotgun did not have yellow or tape on it, so they implied that the shotgun had live rounds. But then later, the video surfaced that showed the policeman had been attacked by the demonstrators and his helmet ripped off, and the shotgun was a beanbag shotgun.
It's a very
lethal round.
Yeah, it's a very difficult situation for the fascist government of China, and I want to describe them that way. Despite the assumption that they are communist, they behave more like fascists, and it's a difficult situation to intervene here, because they want to appear to the rest of the world as though they are promoting liberty or freedom, or at least economic options for the people of Hong Kong. And if they come down too heavily in this demonstration, it will have an effect on their reputation.
Right, and also the Taiwan situation.
Right.
If they come down too hard...
That'll be the end of unification.
Well, I don't know about the end, but it could stir up a lot of trouble, similar demonstrations in Taiwan, which I don't think we've been seeing.
Well, there's already been some arms arrangements signed with them, not unlike what Reagan did when he assumed office. So there could be all kinds of ramifications to this if they are not careful.
Oh, yeah. And they generally are pretty cautious, and they have been pretty cautious. And, it's my understanding, and I could be wrong, because, everything we get is filtered and to some degree or another, either through the mainstream media or perhaps through sources that we rely on more that may have a leftist tinge. But it's my understanding that the extradition was not about people that committed crimes in Hong Kong, but about people that committed crimes like in Macau or other areas of China that were hiding or basically living in Hong Kong, and that they could be extradited out to the mainland or to Macau or wherever the crime was committed.
Right, that was the issue that begat the whole thing.
Right.
And I think it still is probably the core issue. Abandoning that aspect of it could go a long way towards the remedy that China is looking for, but it hasn't been forthcoming. So.
Right. I mean, they've suspended the law, but they haven't actually killed it.
Right.
And when this whole thing dies down, at least some commentators are saying they'll probably pass it, and it won't really cause much of a stir after this subsides.
I have it. My hunch is that after what I've seen here in recent days, because this has been going on for 3 months. But the recent demonstration does seem to be relatively harmless by historical standards.
Yeah.
I mean, there's plenty of potential for physical threat, but it hasn't really materialized.
Yeah, we haven't seen a lot of deaths, if any.
No.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen more in the riots in France, which are still going on, the Gilets jaunes riots, and that the Western media no longer covers them at all.
Right, that's exactly
Nothing to see here. Move along.
Keep moving.
And so it's an interesting situation, and we have to keep an eye on it. But I just caution listeners to take what you hear in the mainstream media with a grain of salt, and understand that the situation could be more complex than simply young idealistic students rebelling for democracy and so on. Yeah.
And there usually is.
Yeah.
It's usually a lot of that goes with it.
Yeah, they would love. Our interests would love to drive a wedge between Hong Kong and mainland China, and just keep driving wedges and divide and conquer. Divisa et impera, I think, is what the Romans used to call it.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Invoking Latin.
Yeah.
That is very good, Brendan. Well, don't go away, folks. Stay with it.
Hi, I'm Hector Larson, and this is my point of view. As a student aspiring to become an attorney, one of the main issues I find in the current justice system is the inconceivable amount of inmates.
Our long-standing customers have faithfully been returning to Kettle Corn Depot since 2012. Come get your groove on in Virginia City.
You're invited to join Business Connections with Anita every Wednesday from 10 to 11 a.m. here on 1180 a.m. KCKQ America Matters.
Unable to listen to the whole show? A recording of today's program will be available later today. Visit americamatters.us and click on the podcast link. Now back to the show.
Hello, welcome back to Talking Truth to Power, Nevada's Freedom Talk Radio. I am your host, Brendan Trainor, and my co-host is Leland Faegre. And Republican gun control, are we going to get it?
You know, they're making a lot of smoke out of that potential fire. I don't know if it's going to yield anything. I think Trump has done this before. It's part of his negotiating style to give legitimacy to his opposition. I don't think at the end of the day there's going to be anything there.
Yeah.
They know there's no solution there.
Well, you know, Nevada has a red flag law now. It was passed in the last legislature.
Aren't there, 13 states now that have?
I think so,
something like that.
And just so you know, I was reviewing it last night, and, you know, we don't have any practical experience with it. It's just going into effect now. It was part of AB 219, which also forbade people in Nevada to buy bump stocks. You know, that's...
well, there was a lot of resistance, too, among the county law enforcement.
Yes.
Because they couldn't, I mean, even if it was a good thing, they can't enforce it. They don't have the manpower.
Okay.
You know, it's just...
Well, yeah.
It's logistically nightmarish.
We do have that grassroots antagonism from law enforcement, but what it basically says is that it limits the number of people, in my reading, that can petition for a red flag or seizure or ex parte ruling, they call it, which means without the defendant being able to testify. The judge issues it without hearing only one side.
Right.
And which
not
is
unlike the FISA courts.
Right. And the initial standard of proof is only the weakest preponderance of the evidence. So that means if the judge feels that there's even 51% of the evidence indicates that an individual might be a danger to himself or others, he can issue the red flag, confiscation injunction.
Too much authority for a judge.
Yeah, it is. That's one weakness of it. And then after that, the initial period of time is 1 week, which is not bad. I mean, in a lot of other jurisdictions, it's the initial suspension of the person's rights can be longer than a week. And then after that, before the week is up even, the person can petition for an extension. And that requires clear and convincing evidence. But so does any attempt to rescind the order. Also requires clear and convincing evidence, which is a higher civil standard than just the preponderance of the evidence.
Are all of the state red flag laws pretty much similarly verbed?
Some of them are worse. Nevada's, at least initially, because it can always be amended if the Democrats keep, control of the legislature. And then I'm sure the shrinks will want in on it. They'll want to be able to petition as well.
Sure.
And other people perhaps, but keeping it to the police and the immediate family members appears to be a moderating influence on it. And then having the next step to require a clear and convincing evidence is also a moderating influence on it. But it's still, we have to see how it works, and it's still taking away somebody's rights without any real due process, minimum due process.
And should there be any exigent urgency, it really does exaggerate the potential weight of how serious this red flag law is. I cite that example earlier on a previous program where a woman was immediately threatened by an ex-boyfriend, and she tried to get a gun immediately, and of course that hesitancy from the state to go into the background of a person made it impossible for her to secure herself, and he came out on her birthday and shot her dead.
Yeah.
Because she couldn't defend herself.
And that type of negative consequence in bureaucratic decision making, and judges are bureaucrats even though they're elected here in Nevada, but that kind of hesitancy, most bureaucrats are afraid of affirming a person's rights and then having that person do something bad.
And isn't it interesting that those who would be reticent to extend people the immediacy of a firearm are those who live in a much more secure environment than we do.
Right. That's a problem that I don't hear the Republicans that are against the background check expansion that are willing to talk about that.
Never comes up.
Yeah. I never hear them talking about the studies that we talked about here on this show, Talking Truth to Power, about how studies have shown that background checks negatively impact the poor and minorities, because they're the most likely people to have something in their background that would preclude them from getting a weapon.
Much more vulnerable. Yeah.
And then they're going to be victimized. And the Republicans, if the Democrats are going to play the race card, I think the Republicans should play it in this instance and talk more about that. Mm-hmm. I'm surprised they're not. I just hear them, talking about other things like, just basically infringing on your rights, and we have to have due process. And I kind of wonder what kind of due process we're going to get in this, either with the background checks or any congressional red flag laws that
all the left wants is an excuse to come after our guns. That's all it is. So to the extent that this furthers that objective,
right,
that will be a success to them.
Yeah, the original red flag law was in communist Russia.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's and. So
your neighbor, it's your neighbor.
So we have to take any kind of talk about due process with a grain of salt, and we have to be vigilant. And interesting to see where the so-called weakened NRA, which has always been a little bit weak in the first place, is going to respond in the weeks to come.
Yeah. Well, what are there 20,000 gun laws on the books now across the country in various states?
Right.
And they got there because the NRA has been protecting the Second Amendment?
Yeah.
Somehow or another, they have been in support of candidates who find themselves in legislatures somewhere who then vote against the Second Amendment. That's how we got here.
Yeah.
Only the gun owners of America.
Only the gun owners of America.
Stand up for us. Yeah.
Yeah, but you don't get all the perks, I guess, when you join Gun Owners of America.
Nor do you get an endorsement from the NRA if you run for office.
Right.
I told you that story where I tried to talk to Wayne LaPierre, and he refused to take the call because he knew where I was going. I was a Libertarian candidate in the Los Angeles area, and I wasn't getting the NRA's endorsement. Pourquoi?
Right. Yeah, even though you are probably much more of a gun rights
than
person
any Republican
than the Republican you're running against.
And yet I'm not getting their support.
Yeah. I know one time I got the endorsement of the Nevada Pistol and Rifle Association, which I was very happy to
I did get the Gun Owners of America endorsement. So I was happy with that.
Yeah.
To hell with the NRA. Who needs the NRA if you have the Gun Owners of America?
Exactly. Yeah, that's a much better organization as far as their ability to actually hold up the Second Amendment and preserve it against the encroachment that the NRA routinely allows.
It's that gradual encroachment that concerns me more than anything, because nobody notices it go away.
The camel's nose is sneaking under the tent.
Yeah. Uh-oh.